I still remember how the roaring sound of metal twisting and concrete splitting shattered my eardrums. One moment I was leaning on my longtime partner's arm, grateful for his presence. The next, the entire ceiling above us collapsed, plunging everything into chaos. My lungs filled with dust, my vision went dark, and the world spun out of control. When I finally opened my eyes, my entire body throbbed with pain. Debris pinned my leg, and every shallow breath sent daggers into my chest. I called out his name, once then twice, but all I heard was the crackle of fires nearby. No reply. Blood pounded in my ears as I fought to stay conscious, wondering why he hadn't answered. Gritting my teeth, I managed to push aside a chunk of rubble just enough to see more of my surroundings. Twisted rebar and shattered glass glinted like cruel shards against the flicker of distant flames. My heart drummed faster when I spotted familiar footprints in the dust, leading away from where I lay trapped. That's when I realized, with a stab of betrayal, that my partner had fled, leaving me behind without a backward glance. My pulse thundered with terror, rage, and heartbreak. How could he do this? We'd shared a home, a life, plans for a future we thought was solid. I tried calling out again, voice cracking with desperation. The only answer came from shifting debris overhead, threatening to bury me further. Then out of nowhere I heard a muffled shout. I stopped breathing for a second, unsure whether to hope or fear. A second later, a beam of light cut through the dust. Panic twisted into a fragile spark of relief when I saw an unfamiliar man approaching cautiously, voice steady despite the chaos. I couldn't make out his face clearly through the haze, but his grip was firm and warm when he finally reached me. "Hold on," he said, pushing aside jagged slabs of concrete. "I'm going to get you out of here." The raw compassion in his tone made tears sting my eyes. Here was a total stranger, risking his life in the very place someone I loved had abandoned me. A sob tore out of my throat before I could swallow it, and I clung to his arm as he worked to free my leg. Pain flared white-hot and I almost blacked out, but he wouldn't let me slip away. "I've got you," he kept saying, as if those words alone could guide me through the agony. Time blurred after that. I remember the man hoisting me into his arms, struggling through corridors of broken walls and flickering embers. Each step felt like a battle, my body screaming in protest. He carried me out into the open air, cool, dark, and somehow more terrifying than the crush of rubble. The night sky above offered no comfort, yet at least I could breathe again. Paramedics swarmed around us, voices urgent and echoing. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was his determined face, illuminated by flashing lights. My partner had disappeared into the chaos, leaving me to die. Another man, a stranger, had done what he couldn't: save my life. As the ambulance doors slammed shut, I wondered if he knew the terrible truth of how I ended up alone under those ruins, and if the one who left me behind would ever face what he'd done. That single question clawed at me, even in the haze of shock and pain. And deep in my soul, I vowed that if I survived, I wouldn't let the man who betrayed me off so easily. I woke to the rhythmic beeping of hospital machines and the antiseptic smell of disinfectant. My head throbbed as if my skull were too small for the worry and confusion racing inside it. For a disorienting moment, I thought I was still trapped under the rubble, waiting for my partner to return, until I felt the tug of an N4 line in my arm and the starched sheets beneath my fingers. Gradually, reality set in. Someone had rescued me, someone who wasn't the man I had trusted with my life. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming and sobbing all at once. Any attempt to speak was just a dry rasp. A nurse entered, moving gently around the monitors, noting down my vitals. She offered me a small cup of water, and I drank in grateful gulps, every swallow sending a ripple of relief through my parched mouth. Her sympathetic expression told me she already knew the broad strokes of my ordeal. "Thank you," I managed, voice cracking. She nodded, adjusting the angle of the bed. "The doctor will be by soon," she said softly. "There's a gentleman here too, he brought you in. Should I let him in?" My chest constricted. My rescuer. I wanted to see him, to say something, anything, beyond the incoherent pleas I'd mumbled while he pulled me from the wreckage. Yet fear and confusion twisted my stomach. A moment passed before I finally whispered, "Yes." The nurse disappeared and I stared at my bandaged leg, replaying the moment I realized my partner had vanished. No matter how often I closed my eyes, I couldn't erase that image of his footprints leading away, or the sharp betrayal that cut deeper than the physical pain. Part of me kept asking how I'd misjudged him so completely. When the door eased open again, I expected an awkward, apologetic figure to shuffle inside. But instead, a tall man stepped in quietly, shoulders squared with a gentle confidence. His face was etched with fatigue and a faint bruise marred his left cheekbone, perhaps from the same disaster that nearly crushed me. Our gazes met and I felt the air in the room shift, less suffocating, more grounded. "Hi," he said softly, voice still carrying that steady warmth I remembered from the darkness. "I'm Lucas. I found you back there." My emotions welled up, threatening to choke me all over again. "Thank you," I managed to say, tears stinging my eyes. "You saved my life." He glanced down, humble in a way that made me believe there was no ego in his heroism. "I'm just glad you're safe," he answered. "Doctor said you'd pull through, but I wanted to be sure. I've been waiting around, hoping to see you awake." Questions battered me. Why risk your life for a stranger? Did you see what happened to the man I was with? But my gratitude overshadowed the rest, and I reached out, letting my fingers brush the side of the bed in a silent offering for him to come closer. He took a step nearer, stopping at the foot of the bed like he didn't want to crowd me. Silence stretched, but it wasn't exactly uncomfortable. Just charged, as though we both realized an unspoken significance in his rescue. When the doctor arrived, Lucas stepped aside politely. A whirlwind of checkups ensued. The press of a stethoscope on my chest, a gentle probe of my injuries, reminders to rest. Through it all, I was acutely aware of Lucas standing by the wall, his watchful presence almost calming. Finally, the doctor left and I found myself alone with him again. I wanted to ask about the structural collapse or how he found me. But more than anything, I burned to know. Had he seen my partner run away? Could he confirm my worst fear with his own eyes? The thought sent a swell of anger and heartbreak through me, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the answer. Lucas must have sensed my turmoil. "I won't stay too long," he said gently. "You need rest. But if you need anything, I'll be around." He paused, his posture uncertain. "Your friend, the person you were with." I flinched at the mention. My throat felt tight, words refusing to come. Slowly I shook my head and Lucas frowned, brow furrowing. "I didn't see him," he said, finishing the thought with quiet regret. "I'm sorry." A hot tear slipped down my cheek. That confirmed it in a way. If he wasn't there to help me, it meant he'd chosen to leave. Lucas hesitated, looking like he wanted to comfort me somehow, but we were still strangers. Eventually, with a sympathetic nod, he stepped out, promising to return the next day to check on me. After he left, my emotions burst free. I sobbed into the thin hospital pillow, chest burning with betrayal and grief. Flashes of memory assaulted me. Dinners shared with my partner, whispered promises about forever, the ring he'd once given me. My leg ached, my body felt shattered, but none of it compared to the throbbing in my heart. And yet, in that raw moment, a tiny spark of resilience flickered. I thought about Lucas, about how a stranger had done more for me in an hour of crisis than the man I loved had done in our entire relationship. Maybe that was the thread I needed to pull on. The realization that, despite being abandoned in my worst moment, I was still alive, still capable of feeling gratitude and forging a path forward. Still, as I curled onto my side, the tears didn't stop. The only comfort I could cling to was the face of the man who stayed by my hospital bedside, even though he owed me nothing. Somewhere in my battered soul I felt the stirrings of a promise. I will live. And the person who walked away from my life will see what he lost when he chose to leave me for dead. Each new day in the hospital brought an onslaught of emotions I could barely manage. On one hand, I was grateful to be alive. My injuries, though severe, were mending faster than expected. On the other, I felt like a raw nerve, haunted by the image of my partner's disappearing footprints. The sting of betrayal clung to every quiet moment, reminding me that in my darkest hour he chose to run. I tried to distract myself with anything the nurses recommended. Gentle exercises, breathing techniques, even mindless TV. But at night, when the halls fell silent and the only sound was the beep of a monitor, my mind inevitably wandered back to him. Did he regret leaving me? Was he out there at all, or had he vanished entirely from my life? The questions burned and festered, leaving me restless and exhausted. Amid that storm of uncertainty, Lucas became a steady presence I never expected. True to his word, he returned each afternoon, ducking into my room with a soft knock. We spoke about little things at first. His job, the city's ongoing disaster relief efforts, the flavor of cafeteria coffee we both disliked. It wasn't much, but it gave me an anchor, a fleeting sense of normalcy in a world turned upside down. One afternoon, after another barrage of physical therapy, I was at my wit's end. My leg throbbed and I swore I could still taste dust in the back of my throat. That's when Lucas showed up again, a small box of pastries in hand. Figured hospital food might be getting old, he said with a cautious smile, as though he wasn't sure if I'd welcome him or push him away. I found myself smiling back, the first real grin I'd worn in days. As we chatted, I asked about his family, curious how someone could be so selfless. His expression softened when he mentioned his grandfather, who taught him the importance of stepping up when others needed help. For a moment, a flicker of warmth replaced my lingering anger at the world. But it couldn't fully shield me from the bitter truth. The one person who should have done that for me had fled instead. When I gathered the courage to bring up my partner, my voice trembled with unresolved hurt. I can't grasp why he left me there, I admitted, swallowing hard. He used to say he'd do anything for me. Lucas hesitated, looking pained. Sometimes fear makes people do things they'd never imagine, he offered gently. But it doesn't excuse what he did. There was a solemn understanding in his eyes, one that told me he'd seen how close I'd come to losing my life. He reached for my hand, stopping just short of touching it. The important thing is that you focus on getting stronger, and realizing you deserve better. His words hit me harder than I expected. I felt tears sting my eyes, a mix of sadness and cautious hope. Part of me wanted to shrink away from the possibility that my future could be different, healthier, happier, but another part yearned for it. For the first time since I woke up in this hospital, I believed there might be life beyond betrayal, a chance to reclaim my own strength rather than letting my ex's abandonment define me. Lucas offered a small pastry and I took a bite, the sweetness oddly comforting. As we sat in that bland hospital room, side by side in fragile companionship, I felt the stirrings of a new determination. Maybe I couldn't erase the past, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let it keep me down forever. Still, a nagging dread gnawed at the back of my mind. Because although I was beginning to see a path forward, I had no idea what might happen if my ex suddenly decided to reappear. And if he did, I wasn't sure how ready I was to face him again, let alone the turmoil he might bring. I didn't realize how deeply the betrayal had burrowed into me until I started having nightmares. They came in flashes, twisted metal choking dust, and the hollow echo of my own voice calling out for help that never arrived. Each time I woke up drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. I'd stare at the ceiling, heart pounding, replaying the awful moment I realized my partner had abandoned me. Physical wounds heal faster than emotional ones, and the doctor said I was making great progress. Truthfully, my body was mending, but my heart was still raw. Every mention of the collapse or any nighttime ambulance siren howling outside triggered a pang of memory. No matter how hard I tried to push forward, the questions kept clawing at me. Why did he run? Did he regret it? Had I meant so little to him? Eventually, the hospital declared me fit enough to be discharged. Lucas offered to drive me home and I accepted. I wasn't sure where else to turn, and something in his sincere eyes told me it was okay to lean on him, just a little. The drive was silent at first, city lights passing by as a kaleidoscope of color outside the window. My legs still throbbed, but not as much as the ache in my chest. We pulled up to the tiny apartment I once shared with my partner. The door looked exactly the same, yet it felt foreign. When I stepped inside, the stillness smothered me. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sunlight, and the stale air hinted that nobody had been around in days. My partner's keys weren't on the hook. His jacket was gone from the rack. Looking around, I noticed a few drawers left half open and random items missing, as if he'd hastily packed whatever mattered most to him. Lucas lingered by the entrance, unsure if I wanted him to stay. I stood there, letting reality hit me. The person I had trusted, the one I thought would always be at my side, had truly vanished. Part of me wanted to tear through the place, screaming out my rage, but I just stood frozen, hand pressed to my bandaged leg. "Do you want me to help you settle in?" Lucas asked gently. My chest felt unbearably tight, but I nodded. He followed me inside, flicking on a lamp to brighten the dreary living room. Step by step, I forced myself to take inventory. The coffee table was still there, but his favorite mug was missing. The couch pillows we bought together, scattered. My gaze drifted to a wedding invitation pinned on the refrigerator, some friend's ceremony we'd planned to attend as a couple. The date had long passed. A surge of anger flared and I grabbed the invitation, crumpling it in my fist. Tears spilled down my cheeks and I hated myself for crying in front of Lucas, this kind stranger who had stepped into my life at its worst moment. He didn't recoil or stare. Instead, he quietly handed me a tissue and tried to offer comfort without prying. Even though I barely knew him, something about his presence let me breathe easier. It felt like an anchor in an ocean of betrayal. After a while he began tidying up small things, picking up abandoned items, stacking mail on the counter. I watched with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. Should I have told him to leave? Perhaps, but the truth was, I dreaded the silence that would descend once he was gone. "You don't have to do this," I finally murmured, voice trembling. Thank you, but it's not your responsibility." Lucas set a half-open drawer right, then turned to me, earnestness in his eyes. "I know it's not," he said softly. "But I care about what happens to you, after everything. It's okay to need a hand." His words crumbled a piece of my carefully built guard. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I sank onto the couch, exhausted by pain and the tidal wave of emotions. Lucas grabbed a chair from the dining area and sat across from me, giving me the space I needed but still close enough to show he wasn't scared off by my turmoil. That's when a sob escaped me. "I don't understand how he could just leave," I whispered, voice ragged. I clutched at my bandages, a pathetic attempt to ground myself. We had a life. Plans. And then he was gone. Lucas looked stricken, as though feeling my hurt in his own chest. "You deserve someone who'll stand by you when things get tough, not run away," he said. "I'm so sorry you had to find out the hard way." His words resonated. No matter how much I tried to spin the situation, there was no denying the truth. My partner had made a choice, one that proved how little regard he had for my life. The sting of betrayal was sharp enough to draw fresh tears, but beneath that sorrow, a flicker of determination sparked. Something in me recognized that I was lucky to be alive and that the person who had saved me now sat here, showing more kindness in days than my ex had offered in months. I didn't know what the next day or the next month would bring, but I knew one thing. I refused to let the cowardice of the man who left me define the rest of my life. In a quiet, shaky whisper, I promised myself that I would not only survive, I would thrive. And if he ever dared to come back, he'd witness a version of me far stronger than the one he abandoned under piles of concrete and steel. Behind me, the sun began to set, casting the room in soft orange light. Lucas and I sat there, two bruised souls caught in the aftermath of catastrophe, one from a disaster that crushed buildings, the other from a betrayal that crushed hearts. And in that fragile stillness, I sensed that my path forward would be painful but not impossible. "Thank you," I said at last, the only words I could manage. Lucas nodded, concern and empathy etched in every line of his face. As evening shadows stretched across the walls, I clung to the single bright spot in my life. I wasn't alone in this recovery. And maybe that was enough for now. The first week back in my apartment stretched into a blur of tangled emotions. During the day, I pushed myself through physical therapy exercises, determined to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. At night, I wrestled with haunting dreams, echoes of collapsing ceilings and the cold absence of the man I'd once relied on. My body was healing steadily, but my spirit felt fragile, caught between anger and a budding sense of resilience. Lucas, true to his word, dropped by every few days. Sometimes he came bearing practical help, groceries, a new stack of bandages, or a ride to my doctor's appointments. Other times he brought simple companionship, filling the silence with gentle conversation. Despite the comfort I took in his presence, guilt gnawed at me. I couldn't stop thinking, should I allow myself to feel safe again so soon after being betrayed? It didn't help that every corner of the apartment held memories of the life I once shared. Opening a closet to grab a sweater reminded me of how he used to borrow my hangers and joke about never having enough space. Reaching for a bowl in the cabinet tugged at the memory of him cooking late-night noodles, claiming we were gourmet chefs. Each recollection was a thorn in my heart. Sometimes I wished I could just pack up everything and start over somewhere else. Anywhere that didn't constantly remind me of what I'd lost. Late one afternoon, I was sorting through a box of old photos, searching for something, though I couldn't say what, when my phone buzzed. I glanced down to see an unknown number. My breath hitched, a mix of hope and dread coiling in my gut. With trembling fingers I answered. Silence on the other end, then a ragged inhale. "It's me," said the voice I never thought I'd hear again. My ex. My pulse slammed in my ears. I swallowed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" I asked, words as cold as the anger I felt brewing in my chest. He hesitated, the line crackling with tension. I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he stammered. "I didn't know if you survived." His words twisted something inside me. Part of me wanted to scream that I'd survived despite him, not because of him. Another part craved some explanation for why he'd vanished. "You left me," I managed, voice shaking. "I could have died." He mumbled something that might have been an apology, but it was too faint to catch. A hot rush of emotion threatened to choke me. Without warning, tears gathered in my eyes, but I blinked them back. Rage flared stronger. "Did you think this call would fix what you did? I don't even know where you ran off to or why. Or if you're sorry at all." A sharp silence followed. I pictured him gripping the phone, maybe feeling the weight of his own cowardice. Finally, his voice returned, low and uneven. "Panicked. I couldn't see a way to help you and I was scared. I left and I hate myself for it." It sounded like remorse, but it didn't quiet the howling sense of betrayal in my gut. "You left me under a pile of debris to die," I spat. "You didn't even call for help, did you?" His response was a strangled murmur. "No, He stopped, as if ashamed to admit the full truth. A hollow ache formed in my chest. Somehow hearing him confirm it felt worse than suspecting it. The conversation teetered on a precipice. I knew I could hang up, cut him off forever and try to move on. But some part of me demanded answers, demanded to see him face to face and make him witness what his abandonment had done. "Don't call me again," I whispered, tears trembling on the edge of my lashes. "If you have anything to say, say it in person. Otherwise, leave me alone." I ended the call without waiting for his reply. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The box of photos on my lap blurred behind pooling tears. Was I truly strong enough to confront him? Or would dredging up the past only reopen wounds I was trying so hard to heal? I sat there, heart pounding, when I heard a light knock at the door. Wiping my eyes, I forced myself up, the ache in my leg a reminder that I'd survived. Lucas stood in the hallway, balancing a plastic container of homemade soup. He took one look at me and his expression shifted from friendly to concerned. "Is everything all right?" he asked softly. For a second I almost slammed the door, desperate to hide my vulnerability. But I couldn't keep shutting myself away. Not from someone who had proven time and again that he cared, no strings attached. I let him in, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with the aroma of soup. He set the container on the counter. "You look shaken," he remarked gently. "I can go if you want space, but I'm here if you need to talk." I wrapped my arms around myself, taking a slow breath. The tension in my chest loosened just a fraction. "He called," I said, voice hollow. "My ex. He said he was checking if I survived." Lucas's jaw tightened. "That's cruel," he murmured, brow creasing with empathy. "I guess it is." My voice quivered and I sank onto a kitchen stool. I told him not to call me again unless he planned to say it to my face. I don't even know why I said that, I just felt so angry. Lucas watched me carefully, then placed a light hand on my shoulder. Warmth spread from that small touch, a steady reassurance in the middle of my chaos. "Sometimes you need closure," he said quietly. "Maybe you need to confront him head-on. Or maybe you'll decide you don't need him in your life at all. Either way, it's your choice." My gaze dropped to my injured leg, covered in healing bruises and fresh scars. The physical wounds were proof of how close I'd come to losing everything. But what about the scars inside? I wondered if letting my ex anywhere near my life again would just make them deeper, or if facing him might help me finally let go. The steam from the container of soup curled upward, a gentle reminder of small kindness in a painful world. Lucas's presence steadied me, but I didn't fool myself. He couldn't make this decision for me. It was up to me to decide whether confronting my ex would set me free or shatter me all over again. Blinking back the tears, I met Lucas's gaze. "I'm tired of being afraid," I whispered, voice laced with a defiance I barely recognized. "He left me for dead. He doesn't get to control my life anymore." Lucas nodded, respect shining in his eyes. "I'm here whenever you need me." Something inside me unclenched. I might not have all the answers yet, and the path ahead was still riddled with uncertainty. But I wasn't alone. And if my ex truly wanted to face me, he'd have to see the person I was becoming. The one who refused to stay broken after being abandoned. A quiet resolve filled me, washing away some of my doubt. That night I sipped Lucas's soup, finding it comfortingly bland and warm. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another call. But none came. Instead, a cold anger simmered just below my skin, balanced by the spark of determination that Lucas's unwavering support had ignited. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't run from it. I'd endured the worst and I was still standing. And for once that felt like enough. A few restless nights followed that tense phone call, each one punctuated by half-remembered dreams of running through rubble, searching for someone who would never come back. During the day I threw myself into physical therapy, determined to reclaim my strength, to remind myself I was more than the trauma I'd endured. There were moments of progress, like when I could walk a full block without stopping, or when I managed to climb the stairs to my apartment without wincing too hard. Yet the emotional weight lingered, refusing to lighten no matter how hard I pushed my body. Lucas remained a reassuring constant, though I sensed he was careful not to overstep. Sometimes he'd text me random jokes or interesting news articles, small gestures that felt like lifelines on my loneliest days. Other times he'd show up at my door unannounced with takeout, always pausing in the doorway as if giving me a chance to turn him away. I never did. If anything, I found myself craving his steadiness, a calm counterpoint to the chaos of my thoughts. One afternoon I decided to venture out alone. I needed to prove to myself that I could handle the outside world without leaning on Lucas for everything. My plan was simple. Pick up some groceries, maybe stop by a bookstore, then come home. Nothing dramatic. Still, my heart pounded as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The memory of being caught in that collapse, how fast it all happened, nagged at the back of my mind, but I squared my shoulders and kept walking. About halfway to the store I caught sight of a figure across the street that made my stomach twist. He was turned away from me, leaning against a lamppost, hood pulled low. Something about his build, the way he shifted his weight, set off alarms in my head. I paused, pulse hammering in my ears. Was it him? My ex, skulking around the neighborhood watching me from a distance? My rational mind told me I might be mistaken. My ex had always carried himself with a smug confidence, and this person seemed hesitant. Still, fear coiled in my gut. I quickened my pace, refusing to stare. But the sense of being watched prickled at my skin, making every footstep feel heavier. By the time I reached the grocery store, I was half convinced I'd imagined it. Inside, I moved through the aisles on autopilot, trying to focus on the task at hand. Bread, milk, vegetables. Mundane things that grounded me to the present. Yet a tremor in my hands kept betraying my lingering anxiety. When I finally stepped up to the cashier, the kindly older woman behind the counter noticed my unsteady grip. "You okay, hon?" she asked. "You look a bit pale." I forced a tight smile. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a little tired." The walk home felt endless. Every few steps I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting a hooded figure to emerge. By the time I reached my building, my chest was tight. Fumbling with the keys, I stumbled inside and nearly dropped the groceries by my door. My heart wouldn't settle. The idea of him lurking, too cowardly to face me yet unwilling to fade from my life, reawakened that old anger. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe I was paranoid. But I couldn't ignore the flutter of unease that followed me around the apartment like a shadow. Finally, I texted Lucas a short, shaky message. "Hey, can you come by? I'm feeling off." Within minutes, he replied that he was on his way. While I waited, I paced the living room, torn between frustration and a gnawing sense of vulnerability. I hated that my ex's possible presence could unnerve me this much. The part of me that was fiercely determined to reclaim my life wanted to fling open the windows, shout at the top of my lungs that I refused to be intimidated. But every time I thought about him slinking around corners, my stomach lurched with a mix of dread and residual heartbreak. Lucas arrived soon after, letting himself in gently when I called for him to come. One look at my face and he set down the takeout he was carrying. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice low and concerned. I told him about seeing the figure on the street, how I couldn't shake the feeling it was my ex. He listened intently, jaw tightening with each word. "Did you get a good look?" he asked. I shook my head. No, but something felt like he was staring at me. Lucas exhaled slowly. It might have been anybody, but I understand why you're scared. His hand drifted toward mine and I let him take it, grateful for the warmth in his grip. Look, if it really was him, he's probably too ashamed to come to you directly. Like you said on the phone, you told him to meet in person if he had anything left to say. Pain lanced through my chest at the memory of that phone call. Then why is he lurking? It's just so. I struggled for the right word. Cowardly. Lucas nodded, sympathy in his gaze. People don't always do the right thing even when they know it would be better. Fear, guilt, it can mess with their heads. He hesitated, then gently brushed his thumb across my knuckles. Do you want me to stay tonight? Just so you feel safer. A part of me wanted to protest, to claim I could handle this. But I was too weary for pride. Would you? I asked softly. He squeezed my hand. Of course. We spent the evening tidying up the apartment, cooking a quick dinner. Lucas tried to lighten the mood with stories about his childhood, like the time he got lost at a county fair and ended up sitting in a llama pen for half an hour. I laughed despite myself, the tension in my chest loosening by degrees. For a few hours, I almost forgot the swirl of unease that had gripped me earlier. But late that night, as darkness settled and the city lights twinkled beyond my window, I found myself standing by the curtains, staring at the street below. My reflection in the glass looked hollow-eyed, uncertain. Lucas had drifted to the couch to give me space, though I sensed he was still awake, ready to help if I needed him. Yet nothing he could say or do would fully erase the question that pounded in my head. Was my ex out there watching? That thought gnawed at me like a restless phantom. I didn't know which possibility unnerved me more, that he was truly there, haunting the edges of my life, or that I was imagining ghosts. Eventually I closed the curtains, shutting out the night. If he was out there, he'd see nothing more than the drawn blinds of a woman no longer willing to cower. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'd decide my next move. Would I try to track him down and force a confrontation? Or would I continue building my life, letting him remain a silent spectator to all I was reclaiming? My heartbeat kicked up at the notion of either path. Yet beyond the fear, a flicker of indignation stirred. I deserved better than hidden shadows and half-baked apologies from a man who had already shown his true colors. As I stepped away from the window, a faint chill ran down my spine. My ex might not have the courage to come face me openly, but it felt like only a matter of time before he made another move. And when he did, I vowed to be ready, stronger than I was before, and determined not to crumble at the memory of the day he left me to die. The hush of the apartment pressed around me, thick with the promise of an unsettling future I couldn't yet predict. In that silent tension, one truth shone through. I was done letting fear hold me hostage. If my ex wanted to remain in the shadows, that was his choice. But I was not the same person he'd abandoned. He would soon learn that, one way or another. And with that thought, I turned off the lights. I felt a strange knot of tension winding tighter in my stomach as the days passed without any further sign of him. It became almost worse than seeing him lurking outside. This prolonged silence, leaving me suspended between anxiety and anger. Part of me wanted him to show up just so I could get the confrontation over with. Another part dreaded ever laying eyes on him again. One morning, after Lucas had gone back to his own place for a few days, I decided to run some errands and clear my head. The weather was mild, the sky a brilliant stretch of blue, and it felt good to step outside without my heart hammering quite so hard. My leg was still a little stiff, but every step reminded me that I was getting stronger day by day. I was leaving the pharmacy when I felt a presence behind me. Not just a casual passerby, something heavier charged with recognition. My pulse quickened. Should I turn around or keep walking? Summoning courage, I spun, nearly dropping the small bag of bandages and painkillers I'd purchased. It was him. My ex standing a few steps away on the sidewalk, hands shoved in his pockets. He looked thinner, his eyes haunted like he'd been living with his own ghosts. For a moment neither of us moved. We just stared at each other under the glare of late morning sunlight. A hot surge of rage pulsed through my veins. Memories flashed. Me trapped, coughing on dust, calling his name into the darkness. All the while he was nowhere to be found. My hands clenched into fists, nails biting my palms. Before I could speak, he took a tentative step forward. "Hey," he managed, voice tight. Can we talk?" I glanced around, aware of people passing by, cars honking in the distance. A confrontation in the middle of the street wasn't exactly appealing, But I wasn't about to follow him anywhere secluded. Finally, I jerked my head toward a small cafe across the street. At least it would be out of the walkway and, more importantly, public enough that I felt safe. We crossed in silence, sitting at a rickety outdoor table. My leg throbbed in protest. I winced, remembering exactly why it hurt and who was responsible for that memory. He noticed. Guilt flickered across his face. Good, I thought, letting the anger simmer. He deserves to feel it. For a few excruciating moments, neither of us spoke. I fiddled with the corner of the pharmacy bag, trying to keep my emotions in check. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, words tumbling out in a rushed murmur. "I know that sounds. It's not enough, but I need you to hear me say it." I stared at him, a dull ache expanding in my chest. "You're right," I replied, voice cold. "It's not enough." He nodded, swallowing hard. I panicked. I know that's no excuse. But when that ceiling started collapsing, I froze. And then, he shook his head, a tremor running through him. I was terrified. I ran, and by the time I realized what I'd done, I felt like it was too late. "I convinced myself you were dead." I couldn't bring myself to face it. His words fell like lead, each one an admission that hammered home what I already knew. He had chosen his own skin over mine. My nails dug into my palms again, that familiar rush of hurt flaring hot. "Do you realize what it felt like for me?" I asked, forcing my voice not to shake. "Waking up alone, trapped, thinking maybe you were pinned somewhere else, only to find out you just left?" He closed his eyes briefly, as if pained by the image. "I hate myself for it," he whispered, voice trembling. "I know I can't fix what I did. But if there's any way, I want to make it right. I want to help you now however I can." A cynical laugh escaped me. "Help me? You're months late for that," I snapped, tears threatening to rise. "Somebody else already stepped up. He risked his life to save me from the rubble you ran away from. He helped me through surgeries, therapy, nightmares. And you just show up now when you think it might be safe to do so." He flinched, and for a second pity stirred in my chest. But I shoved it down, remembering the searing betrayal I'd survived. "Do you want me to say it's okay?" I pressed, voice brittle. "That I forgive you? I'm not sure that's possible." His gaze dropped to the table. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I can't live with the guilt unless I at least try to show you I'm not that same coward." I almost told him how little I believed people changed that drastically, but I held back. Maybe he wasn't exactly the same person. Trauma shapes us all. Still, the scar running across my leg was proof of the price I paid for his choices. "The fact is, you left me when it mattered most," I said, voice trembling with quiet fury. "I'm alive today because a stranger did more for me in 1 hour than you did in all our years together." He reached out like he wanted to touch my hand, but I jerked away. Tears filled my eyes, more from rage than sadness. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel better," I continued, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm telling you so you understand. I'm done with you. Whatever hold you had on me, it's gone. You don't get to waltz back into my life after you decided it wasn't worth saving." His face crumpled, and I saw real anguish there. Part of me hated that I still felt a twinge of compassion, but it wasn't enough to bridge the chasm he'd created. He nodded, tears glinting at the corners of his eyes. "I don't blame you," he managed. Can I at least check on you sometimes? Make sure you're doing all right." I stood up, leg protesting but adrenaline fueling my movement. "No," I said, finality in every syllable. "If you really want to help me, don't force me to keep reliving what you did. Live your life and let me live mine." He rose, two-face pale. I could see him wrestling with a flurry of emotions. Regret, shame, maybe even remnants of love. But it didn't matter. He had destroyed my trust, and there was no going back. I turned and left without another word, ignoring the sting of tears that blurred my vision. By the time I made it halfway down the block, the weight of what just happened finally crashed over me. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to lean against a nearby wall, inhaling jagged breaths. A swirl of relief and grief flooded me, colliding in my chest until I wasn't sure which emotion was stronger. But one truth stood out. I had looked him in the eye. I had told him how deeply he'd hurt me, how his betrayal had nearly cost my life. And I had walked away on my own terms, refusing to let him weave back into my story like a stray thread. I felt changed, raw and sore, but also oddly lighter. The confrontation had left me exhausted, yet somewhere inside, a small spark of triumph glowed. He was no longer a specter haunting me from the shadows. He was just a man who'd made a terrible choice, and I was the woman who had survived it. I wiped my cheeks, standing a little straighter. The day was still bright, people rushing past me unaware of the emotional avalanche I'd just endured. Part of me wanted to rush home and tell Lucas everything, to cry in the safety of his arms. Another part wanted to savor this hard-won closure by myself for a moment longer. With shaky resolve, I pushed off the wall and continued down the sidewalk. My chest hurt, but not in the paralyzing way it used to. The confrontation was over, and I'd come out of it standing tall, having said everything I needed to say. Yet a single thought lingered in my mind, half hopeful, half terrified. Now that I've let go of the past, what's next? The road ahead felt wide open, both exhilarating and daunting. But if I'd learned anything, it was that I wasn't helpless. No matter what my future held, I vowed never to let fear or betrayal break me again. For the rest of that day, my mind felt like a storm-tossed ocean, churned by the confrontation I'd just had. I wandered home in a daze, still grappling with the fact that I'd finally faced him, eyes brimming with tears and anger, and told him there was no place for him in my life anymore. Part of me expected to feel relief. Instead, a complicated tangle of emotions settled in my chest, too snarled to unwind. When I reached my apartment, Lucas was waiting by the door, a concerned crease in his forehead. One look at my face and he seemed to understand something big had happened. He guided me inside, offering quiet reassurances and a supportive arm around my waist, careful not to crowd me. Once I'd sunk onto the couch, he gently asked what was wrong. The moment I opened my mouth, everything spilled out. I told him how I ran into my ex outside the pharmacy, how he asked for forgiveness, and how I shut him down. Rage, sadness, even a flicker of pity. Lucas patiently let me pour it all out, his hand resting lightly on mine. "He can't take back what he did," I said, voice trembling. "But why do I still feel so unsettled? I wanted closure, but now I just feel raw." Lucas didn't try to fix it. He just listened, brow furrowed with empathy, letting me lean against his shoulder when tears got the better of me. A wave of exhaustion pressed down, as though the confrontation had drained whatever reserve of courage I'd mustered. But beneath it all, another truth whispered. I'd stood my ground. It was the first time in months I'd truly believed I had power over my own story. Still, the aftermath proved more difficult than I anticipated. Each time I recalled his face, haggard with regret, my emotions tangled again. Was I being too harsh, refusing even the possibility of reconciliation? Then I remembered my body pinned beneath concrete, gasping for air, and my anger reignited. I was torn between wanting to slam the door on that chapter forever and feeling strangely guilty for not letting him make it right, whatever that meant. In the days that followed, Lucas tried to distract me, suggesting walks around the block, casual lunches, or sitting in the park just to soak in some sunshine. Sometimes it worked. His easy humor and grounded presence reminded me that life could be simple, even light-hearted, despite the darkness I'd been through. But other times, guilt flared up. How could I be laughing at a silly story he told when a part of me was still reeling from betrayal? My heart felt divided. A piece of me longed to trust Lucas fully, to lean into the warmth I felt whenever he was near. But fear of being hurt again kept my guard up, a wall made taller by every memory of the moment I realized my ex had left me to fend for myself in that collapsing nightmare. Each time Lucas looked at me with concern, or something deeper, I found myself withdrawing, uncertain if I deserved this kindness or if I could ever reciprocate it. Complicating things further, my ex sent a handful of texts over the next week, each more frantic than the last. He begged for a second chance. He apologized again and again, claiming he'd do anything to prove he wasn't the person who ran away. I read them in silence, ignoring the sting of unresolved emotions that flared each time his name popped up on my screen. One night after Lucas had gone home, I sat on my bed, phone in hand, scrolling through those messages. My thumb hovered over the reply button, a knot in my stomach. I had no desire to speak with him, but part of me craved the finality I still didn't feel. The apartment felt stifling, shadows of that old life lurking around every corner. I wondered if replying, even to reject him again, would help me breathe easier, or if it would yank me back into the pain I was trying to shed. Eventually, I locked my phone and pressed it face down on the mattress, heart pounding. My leg ached dully, reminding me of the physical scars I carried. Emotional ones ran far deeper, forging questions I wasn't ready to answer. Could I fully embrace a new start with Lucas or on my own, when part of me was still tangled in what my ex had done? Despite my inner turmoil, something else started to blossom. A certain defiance, fueled by survival. The next day I made a conscious choice to set my phone aside, ignoring the buzzing notifications. I refused to let him yank me around like a puppet on strings. If I truly wanted to heal, I had to let my choices guide me instead of reacting to his guilt or pleas. Lucas, noticing my distant mood, asked if I wanted to talk. I managed a small smile, heart warmed by his concern. Not yet, I told him. But soon. I promise. He respected that, offering support without pressing. And in that quiet acceptance I found both solace and a sliver of fear. It was terrifying to think I might let myself grow close to someone again, not knowing if I could withstand another betrayal. Yet every day I was reminded I couldn't keep living shackled by memories of a man who'd proven how little my life meant to him in a crisis. I realized I was hovering at a crossroads. One path led toward confronting every lingering trace of my ex's hold on me. The other offered the fragile hope of forging something real with Lucas. Or at least forging a new chapter for myself, alone or not. Each possibility filled me with equal parts dread and exhilaration. And as I sat on my couch that evening, staring at the messages I refused to open, one truth rose above the noise. I'd survived the worst. I could survive this too. One step at a time, I'd learn whether my ex's betrayal would define me or if I could define my own future, free of the shadows he'd cast. A faint spark flickered in my chest. Something like determination. I vowed not to let fear make my choices anymore. Still, a nagging question trailed every hopeful thought. What if he tries harder to reclaim me? Deep down, I knew the next move might come from him. Or from the parts of my heart I was still wrestling to understand. One way or another, I sensed the fragile peace I'd carved out wouldn't last forever. I woke to another barrage of messages from my ex, flooding my phone with apologies, explanations, even confessions of love. The audacity of it stung like a fresh slap. He'd left me to die and now he was desperately trying to convince me we could still be something. My stomach churned as I deleted them one by one, refusing to reply. Part of me wondered if cutting him off was fueling his desperation, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I'd come too far to be dragged backward. The tension in the air felt electric, like the charge before a thunderstorm. I kept expecting him to show up at my doorstep again. Every time someone knocked on my door or rang my phone, my pulse spiked with a mixture of dread and defiance. But day after day passed without another sighting. He was absent, yet always present in my mind, a constant reminder of how fragile my peace really was. Lucas did his best to support me. More than once he showed up with groceries or takeaway, determined to help me stay grounded. We fell into a gentle routine. He'd come by a couple of evenings a week, share a meal, keep me company. Sometimes we'd watch a movie, though I rarely remembered the plot. My thoughts always drifted back to the man who was lurking on the fringes of my life, the one who begged for a second chance I refused to give. Then came the day I'd been dreading and maybe half expecting. I got home from a doctor's appointment to find my ex waiting outside my building, posture tense as he paced near the main entrance. My heart lurched painfully, adrenaline surging. Every nerve in my body screamed to stay away, but I was too furious, and too tired of running, to retreat. He turned the moment he spotted me, eyes locking onto mine. "Please," he murmured, voice raw. "Just hear me out." I folded my arms, trying not to show how badly my legs trembled. "I told you I don't want this," I said, my voice low. "I have nothing left to say to you." He stepped closer, desperation etched in his features. "I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every time I close my eyes, I see you trapped under that ceiling. I hate that I left you. Let me fix this." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Fix what exactly? My nightmares? My scars? Or the betrayal that made me realize you valued your own safety over my life?" He flinched at the cold edge in my voice but pressed on. "I know words aren't enough, but I can change. I swear I can. I want to be the man you deserve." The audacity of it made me shake with anger. "You had your chance," I spat, tears pricking my eyes. "I was pinned under tons of rubble and you ran. That's who you are. When it mattered most, you chose yourself." My breath hitched, the memory surging back like a flash of pain. "We're done. For a moment it looked like he might lash out or break down. Instead he sagged, shoulders trembling. So that's it? After everything we had, you won't even try to forgive me? Rage and heartbreak warred in my chest. You think forgiveness is something I can just hand over like a gift receipt? My voice cracked. You left me there possibly to die. You never called 911. You never came back to check if I was even breathing. He opened his mouth maybe to protest, but I cut him off with a shaky breath. Lucas risked everything for me. He barely knew me and yet he saved my life, stayed by my side while I healed. He did what you couldn't, or wouldn't, do. How am I supposed to see you in any other light now? His face contorted with pain. I wasn't thinking straight. I was scared. That's the only thing we agree on, I said quietly. You were scared. But you let your fear decide my life wasn't worth saving. He reached out a trembling hand as if to touch my arm. I jerked away, chest tightening with disgust. Don't, I warned, voice hard. We're finished. A tense silence wrapped around us, passers-by giving us both a wide berth. My ex finally dropped his gaze, tears spilling down his cheeks. I watched them fall, my own eyes burning. Once, seeing him this distraught would have broken my heart, but now I was the one in pieces trying to stitch myself back together. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with resignation. I'm sorry. He looked away, swallowing thickly. I'll leave you alone. But I'll never stop regretting what I did. His words washed over me, a hollow echo. I said nothing, my throat too tight to force out a response. With a last, lingering look, he turned and walked away, footsteps echoing on the pavement. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself until he disappeared into the crowd. My head spun with conflicting emotions. Relief that he was gone. Grief for what we'd once been, now irreparably broken. And an odd, pulsing mixture of triumph and guilt. I'd fought so hard for my own safety and closure, but it still hurt to see him so defeated, like we were both the victims of his singular choice. Eventually I trudged upstairs, every bone in my body feeling heavy. The apartment was silent, dust motes drifting in the late afternoon light. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. Tears slipped through my fingers, but they felt different, cleansing somehow. Not like the hysterical sobs of betrayal, but the kind that accompany a bittersweet ending. My phone buzzed. A text from Lucas. Hey, checking in. Everything okay? I stared at the screen, new tears tracking down my cheeks. I realized with startling clarity that I could reply with honesty. There was no longer any need to hide behind excuses or half-truths. My ex had come and I'd held firm. The life he once took for granted would continue without him. I typed a single sentence. He came by, but it's finally over. I'm okay. As I hit send, a wave of exhaustion swept through me. This wasn't the neat, tidy closure I'd dreamed of. No perfect moment where I walked away unscathed. But it was closure nonetheless. I felt my heartbeat slow, the tension easing from my shoulders. I allowed myself one trembling sigh, letting the last dregs of anger and sorrow bleed away. There would be more to process, undoubtedly, but I was no longer paralyzed by the question of whether I should face him. I had faced him and I'd chosen myself. The thought sparked a fragile sense of hope. Maybe, after all the nightmares and the heartbreak, I could finally move forward, step by step on my own terms. And if Lucas was part of that future, I'd see where that path led me. But one thing I knew for certain. I wasn't living in fear of the past anymore. After I shut the door on him that final time, the entire apartment felt different. Lighter somehow, even in its silence. I sank onto my couch, exhaling a breath I'd been holding for what felt like years. Images of him walking away played over and over in my mind. His slumped shoulders, the tears in his eyes. Once upon a time I would have run after him. Now all I felt was profound relief. I was free. In the days that followed, a curious calm settled over me. I couldn't pretend the wounds had vanished. They still throbbed at odd moments, especially when I dreamed of the accident that nearly ended my life. But each morning I woke a fraction stronger, more convinced I'd done the right thing. My ex had forfeited any claim to my future the moment he chose to abandon me in that broken building. I survived because of someone else's courage and, more importantly, my own will to live. Lucas noticed the change before I did. He said I stood a bit taller, that I laughed more easily, even if it was just at his silly jokes. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with this gentle pride, like he was witnessing a transformation I hadn't fully recognized yet. We never officially defined our relationship. Instead, we took small steps toward closeness. Sharing meals, taking walks, spending quiet evenings watching movies or discussing plans for the next weekend. It wasn't always seamless. I still guarded my heart, flinching at the idea of another betrayal. But with each passing day it felt safer to let him in. Meanwhile, I learned, through mutual acquaintances, that my ex was still around, drifting in and out of our old haunts. He never contacted me again, but I heard the rumors. He'd ask friends about me or linger in places I used to frequent, hoping for a chance encounter. I couldn't bring myself to feel pity. He was watching my life from a distance now, a spectator to the strength and happiness he once took for granted. Every time I thought of him skulking in the background, it reminded me how far I'd come from the terrified, broken person he'd left under the rubble. Healing wasn't linear. I had nights when nightmares returned, images of concrete and twisted metal flashing behind my eyelids. But I'd wake up heart pounding and remind myself that I made it out. That I was here in my own bed, not trapped beneath debris. Sometimes I'd text Lucas at 3 a.m, just to hear his reassuring words. Or on braver nights I'd calm myself with slow breaths, determined to prove my resilience. And each time I found that survival had become a part of me, a source of quiet power rather than lingering shame. One evening I revisited the site of the collapse. The city had cleared away most of the wreckage, the once mangled building replaced by fenced-off construction. Standing there, I closed my eyes and allowed the memory to wash over me. My heartbeat quickened, spikes of fear from that terrible day, but then eased into something more contemplative. This was where I'd nearly lost everything. Now I stood on my own 2 feet, free of the person who left me behind, open to a future I was creating step by step. Walking away from that place, I felt tears slip down my cheeks. Tears of acceptance, of final release. If he wanted to watch from the shadows, so be it. He'd see me live a life defined by my own choices, surrounded by people who'd proven they deserved a spot in my world. I didn't need vengeance or even forgiveness. What I needed was exactly what I had. My independence, my growing self-worth, and the unwavering knowledge that I could survive anything. By the time I reached home, the sun had dipped below the skyline, painting the horizon with soft pink and gold hues. Lucas was there waiting, a gentle smile lighting his face. And in that moment I understood. I wasn't living in the wreckage of the past anymore. I was firmly in the present, ready to claim every bit of joy, strength, and possibility that lay before me.